Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the most realistic games ever made. It's got visuals and a story that rival about any cinematic experience. It's a game that you won't soon forget. But is it any fun to play? Let's talk about that. Before I dig into gameplay, I need to explain what Rockstar's created, at least in my experience. For me, Rockstar delivered an experience that's authentic to how we perceive America in 1899. You see, the rules of humanity apply in this space, so much so that weather hurts you when you're cold, and different biomes exhibit different wildlife and foliage, especially where they converge into gorgeous ecotones. The survival elements of gathering and crafting are simple as resources are abundant. It's never too tedious to have to find something you need, which may be a place where realism was adjusted to enhance the player's experience. This world looks and feels real. Water and mud react beautifully when you pass through them. The wildlife moves and hides and attacks in ways that feel more natural than most games. The world just feels right, at least for the most part. There are some Avatar movement issues, like the fact that Arthur can't mosey up a seemingly menial hill or a rock. Even more annoyingly, in 2018, there's a distinct lack of depth to the amount of interaction of the items in the world. Most open-world games have far more immersive environments, opening up layers of player creativity that just don't exist here. When Link and the Breath of the Wild could interact in multiple ways with everything visible on the screen, Arthur's only presented the luxury of shooting the occasional lantern. The part of the world that you do get to interact with is, in most part, the people. One of the key elements of the game, the honor meter, is improved by salutary greetings to NPCs.
Hey, mister!
NPC interactions do make the game more immersive, but that immersion fades quickly as each interaction is limited to a couple of back and forths, often closed with an ill-timed or out-of-place goodbye from Arthur.
Well, I should get back to it.
I would have loved a few more interactions that went on longer, whether they be completely irrelevant to the story or tied in somehow. But again, in a world that looks this natural, is this realistic, and is so much more authentic than almost anything we've seen before, some of that's forgivable. It's in the open world outside of camp where you can escape the disappointments of your outlaw life, becoming a player solely in each region's nature. But speaking of that outlaw life, in my and many others' opinion, Rockstar delivered an endearing but standard Western tale. The writers didn't attempt to break new ground with their storytelling, but did well sticking to a tried-and-true trope of an outlaw coming to grips with the morality of his actions, both in the past and the choices he continues to make. Our protagonist, Arthur Morgan, once satisfied with the arbitrary guardrails placed upon the gang's activities, begins to question the choices of gang leader Dutch van der Linde. And while Arthur's uneasiness is a reasonable narrative device used to expose the faulty logic and cult-like power dynamics of Dutch, you're never given an outright choice to disband from the group. Rockstar forces you, should you want to finish the game, to go along. And it's that adherence to Rockstar's story, to this movie game that they've created, that limits the player. It forces us to experience the story they intend to tell, instead of allowing us to create our own. Only in side quests can us as the player choose to find some meaning, aiding or hindering groups like the KKK and advocates of women's suffrage. It isn't until the final few missions of the main story that you begin to feel like what you're doing really matters. If you've played any recent Rockstar game, you know how the mission plays out. Some narrative thread sets up the purpose of the mission, which more than likely leads to you going on a lengthy horseback or carriage ride to allow for character or situational exposition. The actual missions are, as always, mostly gunfights, which means from an input perspective, you're going to flick your left joystick to get your sights in the direction of an assailant, hold down the L2 to lock your target on, and hit R2 to shoot. And then you're going to repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. And that repetition is frustrating, for me at least. Rockstar's combat almost always feels the exact same. Unlike other games, like Doom, where players are rewarded with health points for melee kills, there are no rewards or constraints to change how missions feel. It's only in the instance where Rockstar has specific narrative elements where they need you to engage in hand-to-hand combat that you're directed into close quarters. Just like Grand Theft Auto 5, just like Max Payne 3. Their approach to combat, while a welcome break from dialogue and riding your horses, results in far less an engaging experience. The only variety you come across is changing modes from on foot to horseback to maybe being a passenger on a wagon, which, like a certain boat mission from Max Payne 3, turns the game into the most basic of on-rails shooters. And I'll be honest, I kind of enjoyed that actually. There's very little mastery available to players though, only story and inventory-based progression. The lack of interaction between elements in the world also affects missions. Where many other games afford you the ability to creatively take down your enemies, Red Dead Redemption 2 pretty much limits you to gunplay. Where games like Hitman might enable the use of environmental elements for incapacitating enemies, the only environmental play you'll see in Rockstar's world is in the cutscenes. In fact, missions are so locked down that you're not even able to flank enemies if you want to. You're locked onto a path just to maintain the continuity of the next cutscene. Rockstar will get better at this. I think they'll have to, just because the zeitgeist of gaming will force them to eventually. But for now, as long as they keep pushing the boundaries of what these worlds look like and telling compelling stories with enjoyable characters, people will keep enjoying Rockstar games. I mean, for me, the story, despite its lack of novelty, the world, despite some movement and interaction issues, and characters, despite the shallowness of the conversational mechanics, are what sell this game and make it memorable. While the gameplay is a bit stale, there's something to say about a game that doesn't require you to remember 24 different approaches to varied tools and combat situations. A lot of games do too much, creating too complex of systems that just create chaos instead of creative expertise. Given the choice between stale and that, I think I'd choose the more limited approach. But maybe in crafting this world, and this story, and these people, Rockstar's strategy for simplified play makes sense. At any rate, the game is enjoyable, and by most measures, still pretty fun. Thanks for watching. There's so much I didn't get into in this, like how annoying some of the controls are, like riding a horse through Saint Denis, how wonderful it is to just sit back and fish, or how enjoyable the hunting tracking mechanisms are, how much I ended up genuinely loving Arthur, and how weird it is when someone else shares a clip of him and how I deniably react. That's not Arthur. But all of that, well, we'll have to wait. We'll see you next time.